Okay, here we are. Hi, everybody. How's day 2? Good? Good? That's what I like to hear. Can we get a little bit more of that for you all? Day 2 of Creativity Week. Okay, let's talk about sign up for student night, because you know I'm just going to keep bugging you until every single one of you signs up. I noticed there's a few more sign-ups. If you haven't, I encourage you to do so. You won't be sorry. It's a really great night. If you haven't done it, you won't ever forget it. It's my favorite night every week. Nothing against the amazing faculty that get up here 3 nights a week, but when the students get up here and read and when they show their work in their studios, it's really moving. Just the bravery and it's just inspiring, and I'm just proud. So if you haven't signed up, please consider doing so. And I'll stop talking about it on Thursday. We have a great lineup for our faculty event tonight. We're really glad you're here. We have Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle. A big round of applause. We have Dante Micheaux. Very happy to have Dante back. And one of our favorite printmakers of all time, James Stroud. He's been coming here since 1758. He missed a couple of years during the Civil War. I'm just kidding. We haven't been open that long. We've been only open since 1960. All right, I'll keep going. Okay, heads up. We relaunched our online programming today. It's been retitled from 24 Pearl Street, that you may or may not be familiar with, to Fogg Online. And we have a whole new range of workshops, one of which is going to be an extension of your summer. If you've taken a poetry workshop this summer, if you're taking a poetry workshop, we have an online workshop that's an extension that allows you to keep working on what you've been working this summer in a very relaxed atmosphere that's moderated and facilitated by MP Carver, who facilitates our submit-a-thons online. She's really great. Anyway, so if you're taking a poetry workshop this summer, check out foggonline.org. And you look at the catalog, and there's some really great offerings. We're also experimenting with offerings for visual artists also, so because this has been historically just a program for writing workshops. So we're really proud of the launch. There's some really interesting stuff on there. Check it out, foggonline.org. Annette and Dante will be signing books at that table where Bert is sitting at the end of the event. He'll move, don't worry, he's good. He'll be signing Bert will be signing Dante and Annette's books at the end of the event. And their books will be for sale, along with books by other faculty from this week and this summer, both on the table, in the bookcase at the back, and also in the bookstore between the two halves of the gallery. Speaking of which, if you haven't seen the new summer exhibition called To Move a Mountain, curated by past fellow Cody Brown, please do so. It's a beautiful exhibition. It's really great. Check it out. Also, we have some great merch in the back. I'm going to say this tomorrow night. So if you've been here last night and you're going to be here tomorrow night, just, I'm just going to say the same things roughly. So you can check your Instagram or something until I tell you to turn the phones off. I would like to thank Arts Foundation of Cape Cod and the Cape Cod 5 Foundation, who support our summer public programming. Restrooms remain down the hall. They're still there. We have assisted listening devices at the back of the room. If that would help you enjoy the evening more, please check with Dustin or Miracle, and they'll set you up with one of those. And finally, I'm going to ask you to do the thing, turn off your cell phones, so you're not one of those people who we feel badly for when their phone goes off in the middle of the event. Kimiko? Sort of badly? Any other comments? Yeah, silent or off, that would be awesome. And now I would like to, I'm sorry, Kimiko, what? It's okay. You're going to have your turn tomorrow. Kimiko Han, newly anointed Poet Laureate of New York State, teaching with us this week. So grateful to have her back. And she will be reading tomorrow night, so be sure to come back tomorrow. Right now, though, I'd like to invite one of Annette's students up to the stage to introduce Annette. Can I please welcome to the stage Zoe Flavin, sorry. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to introduce Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle this evening. I'm lucky enough to be in her workshop this week. On our first day, she spoke about how writing fiction is the marriage of ideas with people and process. She said you can't just have the idea, the larger theme, or guiding principle of a piece. You have to be concerned with the nitty-gritty, the characters, actions, and bodies. A rendition of the Flannery O'Connor quote that fiction is about everything human and we are made out of dust. And if you scorn getting yourself dusty, then fiction isn't a grand enough job for you. As an example of this, ideas versus process thinking, Annette said she's finding it hard to talk about her next novel because she has the big ideas, but it's hard to summarize it into a pitchable package. I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. We all said, well, what's your idea? We all really wanted to know. She said the novel is about what it'd be like if a US state banned all reproductive health care and a sovereign tribal nation began offering that health care and all the stories that might come from that. We all looked back at her like, that sounds pretty brilliant to us. In the very short time I've known Annette, I've really appreciated her approach of what she calls not talking above or over writing, but centering on those dusty bits of what really makes writing move within each of us. I'm excited for all that I'll continue to learn from her this evening and throughout the week. Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle is a citizen of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and resides in Qualla, North Carolina. She holds degrees from Yale University and the College of William and Mary. Her debut novel, Even As We Breathe, was a finalist for the Weatherford Award, named one of NPR's best books of 2020, and received the Thomas Wolfe Memorial Literary Award. It also is the first novel published by a citizen of the Eastern Band of Cherokee. Clapsaddle's work appears at outlets such as Yes Magazine, LitHub, Bon Appetit, and The Atlantic. Please welcome Annette.
Thank you, Zoe. That was great. I really appreciate it. I've really enjoyed meeting my class this week, and I'm so inspired by the work and willingness that they're offering. And I'm happy to be here for the first time, so thank you for the invitation to be here. And I'm going to throw things periodically. That was a warning. I taught high school, so I know how to keep people awake. I wanted to speak today, and I'm not going to go through a lot of slides, but I wanted to position my reading around a topic that comes up a lot for me. So as Zoe mentioned, Even As We Breathe is the first novel published that was written by a member of my tribe, which is very, very sad to me because Cherokee have the oldest indigenous written language in the world. And so for it to take until 2020 for one portion of the Cherokee population to have a published novel is absolutely ridiculous. And so a lot of my work centers on how I can change that, right? How I can offer new narratives, and how I can offer opportunities to other writers in our community to get their work out, because I do not want to be the only novelist from my tribe much longer, I hope. So my writing inherently is about both the personal and the political. I don't think that I escape that ever, and I don't care to try to escape it ever. I often start talks when they're longer talks about literature with this image, and I ask people in the audience to tell me who they think this is. And if I'm home, then sometimes people know exactly who this is. But if I'm this far away from home, I just have to take guesses from the audience. And I tell people to be brave and take guesses, and they won't offend me. And since this is short, I'll only take 2 guesses, what you might know about the person on the screen just based on the image? To anybody, have a guess? John Lovitz, thank you. I often get different actors. John Belushi is an actor I get a lot. Anything else you might, yes? Okay. What makes you think this is an actor? What about it? What makes a characterized face? This is good. This is good. What is it specifically? I'm sorry? Strength. How does this person communicate strength? The eyebrow raise. It's almost like The Rock, right? Yes. Or John Belushi, yeah. Okay. Like a costume, right? The headdress, yep. Great, thank you. And then now in some communities, when I show this picture, I immediately get, he's a chief, you know. This is a community that recognizes there's something off about this, right? So don't feel bad when I say this. I'm gonna I'm gonna make you feel better in a moment. The gentleman on the screen is my grandfather, Oscar Wilde Saunooke. Now, he is in costume because my grandfather, though he was a 2-time elected chief of our tribe, legitimately, he was also a world heavyweight wrestling champion. And that is his gimmick. He was the Cherokee chief when he wrestled. And so I like to start off talks with that because when you are from a community like ours whose economy is largely based on tourism, where our identity has been commodified over and over again, we have a duality about how we represent ourselves. And it is both the authentic side and the commercialized side. And luckily, as time progresses, we're able to revert to the authentic side and talk about how this isn't who we are, but his generation had to do these things to survive economically. So happy to talk more about that later. I know that we are limited in time. So this is not Cherokee. This is Asheville, North Carolina, where the other part of my novel is based. So part in Cherokee, part at the Grove Park Inn in Asheville, North Carolina. Has anyone here been there? Awesome, yeah. So the Grove Park is a very high-class resort. The Obamas will vacation here, for example. And this has, been going on for a very long time. When I was researching the book, I never stayed here. I can't afford to stay here. And it still looks like this today. And these, of course, are older postcards. The novel is set the summer of 1942, when the Grove Park Inn, not 1949, but 1942, when the Grove Park Inn held Axis diplomats and foreign nationals as prisoners of war that summer. A piece of our history that is rarely known, even to historians in our area, where there wasn't a lot written about it. But I came across an article that mentioned it. And Asheville is 1 hour from the Qualla boundary, the seat of our government. So I found it an interesting setting to take my character to this completely different world just down the road in the middle of wartime, and to talk about issues of citizenship, identity, and culture and class, all during the summer of 1942. So I'll just read the prologue from my novel, and that will kind of give you a background. About the place, when I take you there or when you find it on your own, just know that what the old folks say is true. This land is ours because of what is buried in the ground, not what words appear on paper. But also know this, what is buried in the ground isn't always what you think. It's just the beginning. It's the beginning of the story, the beginning of all of us who call ourselves Homo sapiens. Fitting, I guess, that what I found buried just as I was trying to figure out how to become a man and still be human was the very thing that threatened to take it all away. Just when I began to see what taking control of my own life might look like, I realized I was not who I thought, and neither was this place. That summer in 1942, when I met her, really met her, before I found myself in a white man's cage and entangled in the barbed wire that destroyed my father, I left the cage of my home in Cherokee, North Carolina, which is what this picture is of. I left these mountains that both hold and suffocate and went to work at the pinnacle of luxury and privilege, Asheville's Grove Park Inn and Resort. I guess I convinced myself that I would become fortunate by proximity, escape Uncle Bud's tirades and my grandmother Leishy's empty kitchen cabinets just by driving a couple of hours up the road. It sounded good to tell folks I was raising money for college, but the truth was I didn't know what I was doing. I just didn't want to do it there anymore. And if I stayed any longer, I would become rooted so deeply I might as well have been buried. My plan didn't quite work the way I thought it would. When I got to the resort, I mostly stayed outside, cut the trees, mowed the grass, and helped to dig the holes that would sink signs and posts for barbed wire fences. Music occasionally seeped from the ballroom, but was muted by thick lead-pane windows before one note ever reached the perimeter of the property. That's where I first found the bone. I was on my hands and knees pitching rocks and digging holes. It was just as the inn, like its music, was becoming dulled by wartime restrictions and hushed by lead bullets. The prisoners, who were actually diplomats and foreign nationals, treated more like guests, weren't really known to me yet. That little girl, God bless her soul, had barely even stepped foot on the property, and I was still as free as I would ever be. I squatted there by the fence along the boundary of the Grove Park property and grasped the bone by its middle, pointing both ends upward, studying its curvature, a bent bauble for my idle adolescent hands to fidget with in the absence of a ball stick or a soldier's rifle. I can't recall playing with many toys as a child. That's probably why the bone spoke poetry to me as a young man. It was smooth and porous, its slight C-curve angled in motion, calling to be grasped, used, a weapon, at least in some primitive function of strength, like a subhuman scythe, though innately human, maybe even the very core of humanity. And now, as I recall the moment out loud, it was an embarrassing indulgence of make-believe for a 19-year-old. It's all right to laugh, I don't blame you. Such an extraordinary object to be inside flesh. It was wholly earthen, not sterile or cellular. It was natural in a way we pray our body is not. Momentary, seasonal, destined for expiration. The bone had lost its story, petrified into a mere alkaline deposit, transient and nameless. I was immediately spellbound by this calcified opportunity to embrace a remnant of life's existence in one hand, dry it, dust it, preserve it, and listen. Buried by a story, and I was the only one on this earth privileged to hear it. County. It seemed to coo my name like the beautiful girls in my daydreams, the ones who never took interest in boys like me. Just as I was yet to know of a certain beautiful girl's power, I was yet to understand the power the bone would wield over my life. I was yet to know how much more I would risk for her, for it. I am bits and pieces of the people I meet, my teachers once told me, though more accurately, I'm of people and places and creatures. And so because of that summer and that war and that small, hollow relic, I am bits and pieces of a grand estate and a half-tame primate and a dozen accents and a missing girl and a fearful girl and all the trees and mountains and asphalt in between. And you, well, I reckon you will be too soon enough. Knowing that she's now gone from this earth, all I'm left to do is wonder what remains of her here. For me, for anyone who knew or didn't know her. What happens to the memories? How long do they survive? I can still see her dancing, head thrown back laughing. If there's one thing old age has taught me, it's that there are many kinds of love. She taught me that sometimes we feel many different kinds with one person. And now it seems possible that love is the only thing that will outlive us all, but only if we continue to tell its story. So that is from the novel. I'm just going to leave this for you to read as I transition. Craig Womack is a native academic who I had read his work in college, and his statement that if we give away all of our power to a group of outsiders to determine our aesthetics for us, they will, if we don't put up a fight. And so I feel like it's kind of my mission to put up a fight. And this novel in progress that Zoe mentioned, I think is also a piece of that fight. There is a famous ethnographer, James Mooney. If you're a historian, you may have heard of him. And in 1887, he came to our community to gather the stories of the Cherokee people. His collection is the most famous comprehensive collection of origin stories for the Eastern Band Cherokee, I would say for Cherokee in general. And what I found was that even we as Cherokee people started relying on it to be our source of origin stories, to determine our values for us. And I realized that changed our decision making because it was telling us what our values were through the lens of someone who wasn't from our community, who had a very different lens, a very white male Christian lens for this matriarchal Native community. To no fault of his own, he was doing the best work he could, right? But it wasn't our voice. So I started taking excerpts to compare what it would look like if we were telling our own stories. And so this novel is about a woman named Maisie. These are all enrolled tribal citizens. Her mother, Lizzie, and her daughter, Tuya. I won't go into the whole spiel because, as she mentioned, I don't have my elevator pitch yet. But you heard a little bit about it. I wanted to just read you a piece from Lizzie that's really short that gives you an idea of how we determine our own values for ourselves. And so each chapter has an epigraph. The first epigraph that Lizzie gives us is from Mary Chiltowski, and she is an Eastern Band woman storyteller. So this is more true to our value set. She's telling the story of the legend of the living waters. She says, "The disappointed little girls obeyed and went to the branch after breakfast. She explained to them that all their lives they have washed in the living water of the branch, and they had been well. She explained that the Great One sends the spirit of the water, and when you dip it up, the spirit is killed. The Cherokee believe in starting each day with the living water sent to the stream by the Great One." And then this begins Lizzie's voice. "I read Faulkner's As I Lay Dying when Maisie was a teenager. She'd been assigned it in school, but it never left her bedside table far as I could tell. One day, while tidying, I picked it up. Couldn't stop reading it. Felt like truth, like everyone's truth. I couldn't tell Maisie everything when I was living, just like Addie Bundren hadn't told her family. Or maybe we both just chose not to. I came close that night Roger called her that awful name. She deserved to know where she was coming from, my part in it all. And later when I knew she was crying over that FM, who's a guy, I should have told her. A gold band wrapped around a finger can be a mighty heavy anchor keeping you from raising your hand. Now, after it's all too late for me to say my piece, I can't help but wonder if Maisie did read that book. Does she think now my mother is a fish? It's not such a bad thought. Bible even says in John 3:5, except a man born of water and spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. Fish know a thing or two about water, I suppose. And it just carries to a different chapter. These are the two epigraphs. The first is from James Mooney, the ethnographer. When he reached the Cherokee country, he was very tired, and his wings began to flap and strike the ground. And wherever they struck the earth, there was valley. And where they turned up again, there was a mountain, from how the world was made. And this is Mary Chiltosky again. Same story. Well before sundown, the animals saw an unusual sight at the council house. They didn't recognize the old buzzard, and he kept his mouth shut until they all gathered round. Then the lowliest of animals told them where to find the earth. He flew away, having done his very best, but before he was far away, he looked back toward the earth and saw what he had done. He saw the beaten valleys and the piled-up mountains. He had made the Great Smoky Mountains, which were later peopled by the Cherokee, who learned to respect all animals, even the old buzzard. This is Lizzie's voice again. They used to tell us in school about the tortoise and the hare, one of that man Aesop's fables. I loved those stories. We'd sit in the one-room schoolhouse on Soko. The boarding school had closed by then. Tony and little Davy kept the wood stove going, and our teacher would smile her big, toothy white smile. She told us these were ancient stories, and in a schoolhouse, ancient was apparently a good thing, a smart thing. I'd go home and ask Doda to tell us our Cherokee story of how the terrapin beat the rabbit. Both were foot races, if you recall. Trickster rabbit, always the loser. Of course, neither of those stories are really about animals, are they? Just like Addie wasn't really a fish. And Wild Boy, the boy born of the river in those old stories, was never really all that wild. I'm glad Tuya is hearing these stories again. She talks to me still, you know. I hear my name, and I'm not sure if it's so much prayers like we said in church, or just carrying on the way we used to around my kitchen table. Last time she came to me like that, I tried to tell her about Wild Boy again. She needs that story. She's writing them down, but she tells stories different than I taught her. I guess there's nothing wrong with that. They're kind of pretty. Sound like a fairy tale book. We never had those at the schoolhouse. So I'll stop there. But this is all an effort to erase images like this, which are really what created our aesthetic in Native literature early on, because it wasn't written by Native people. And so through art and literature, we've got an uphill battle to fight. A certain political figure said yesterday in a tweet, "We didn't kill enough Indians." So we've still got some work to do. And so this is, these are just the guiding principles. This is real quick. A friend and Cherokee leader, Tom Belt, said that ceremony, he said the thing about ceremony, it must have three things. It must be for the right reason, at the right time, and in the right place. And I told my class today, we were talking about conversations and dialogue, and I said, you know, that's ceremony, but really writing and art is ceremony in itself. So I try to think about these three aspects. And then I always try to incorporate our 7 core values and share them when I'm out in the public. So thank you for your time. I want to hear the other folks, so I'm going to jump off here.
Thank you so much, Annette, for that wonderful reading, and to Zoe for that lovely introduction. Next, I would like to invite one of Dante's students, Sam Marin, to the stage, who will introduce Dante Micheaux.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Marin Johnson. I'm honored to introduce this evening's faculty speaker, Dante Micheaux. This week, Dante has created a space in his poetic voice workshop where vulnerability and strength coexist. His literary knowledge seems to know no bounds. His generous spirit is inspiring. His brilliance and wit are jaw-dropping. Actually, over the last couple of days, I've found myself kind of just a bit stunned. I find myself doing this because he makes incredibly specific connections and reference to past poems. Some of my classmates have written like a year ago and brings them back into the space. Or like in a flash, he'll create these amazing pathways for revision and new possibilities. I really honestly can't believe how lucky I am for him to be my teacher this week. Dante Micheaux is the illustrious author of Circus, which won the Four Quartets Prize from the Poetry Society of America and the T.S. Eliot Foundation, and Amorous Shepherd. His poems and translations have appeared in African American Review, the American Poetry Review, Callaloo, Literary Imagination, Poem a Day, Poetry, and Tongue, among other journals and anthologies. Dante's most recent work is a libretto for Rolf Hind's opera, Sky in a Small Cage. Micheaux's other honors include the Oscar Wilde Award, and Amy Clampitt Residency, the Ambit Poetry Prize, and fellowships from the New York Times Foundation and Cave Canem. As director of programs at Cave Canem, he is committed to cultivating the artistic and professional growth of Black poets. So amazing. Founded by Artists for Artists, Cave Canem fosters community across the diaspora in which we learn, experiment, create, and present. So this week is the first week that we've met in workshop, but I have been incredibly fortunate to be able to participate in one of the programs he created, a regional workshop in New York City with poet Reginald Harris on the American Sonnet. My community and understanding of what I am capable of as an artist has grown and taking me to places I could not imagine before, and continues to grow and transform several years later. Dante, thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that, please join me in welcoming Dante Micheaux.
Goodness, I don't know what to say after that introduction. Thank you all for coming. Sadly, I don't have any slides. Can you all hear me? Yes, okay, good. I'm going to read from a bunch of different things. I thought since I was back at Fine Arts Work Center that I had the opportunity to talk about writing that I do that's really in community. So I'm going to read from a bunch of different projects that I've been working on with others. But I'll begin with something I always do. I always start my poetry readings with a poem by another poet. And we were talking today about the great Martinican poet Edouard Glissant. And so I'll tell this little story that I told to the participants in my workshop during COVID, or during the pandemic when we were all trapped in our homes. I got a postcard from a poet I greatly admire named Jay Wright, greatest American poet living. And he, no offense to all my illustrious peers, but 91 years old, living in Vermont, still publishing books, a brilliant, brilliant mind. And he just sent me a little note card saying, Dante, I think you should translate Edouard Glissant, and you should translate this specific poem. So, you know, I didn't think I was capable or had the skills to translate Glissant, but I did it anyway because Jay Wright asked me. So I'm just going to read one short section from a poem of his. He writes really long poems. And so this is the penultimate section of a 7-part poem itself is written in 7 parts. And this is the 4th of that. The poem is called Le Sel Noir, Black Salt, and this section is called Le Grand Midi, which I translate as Great Noon. Il y a 7 oiseaux, un seul oiseau sur notre table. Est-il la femme dans le champ, dont nul avoué si elle est femme ou forêt qui sait prendre? Est-il les 7 amertumes, un seul nuage, un vin de sel, comme un serment de merde que la plage n'entende? Est-il eu la froide nuée fleur de l'avant, à l'heure où les voiliers quittent l'avant, rentrés dans l'horizon d'argile et des rames? Il y a 7 oiseaux, fixité noirs sur les marigots, qui tremblent. There was this bird, a single bird on our beach, and there was the woman in song, which no one avows is a woman or a forest in love. And there was this bitterness, a single cloud, a winnow of salt, like a sea oath that the sand does not hear. And there was night, the cold, naked flower from the front, at the hour when sailboats, leaving the wind, would return to the horizon of clay and oars. There was this bird, black fixity on the backwaters, which tremble. So that's Edouard Glissant. And now I'm going to read a short section from the last canto in my poem Circus. The canto is called Striking the Tents. Cartwheels and hallelujah festoon the heat. Underneath a white tarpaulin, holiness in all its unholy rejoicing. What once sheltered a boy's laughter comes down on the heads of people, comes down on our heads, and few notice. The poles, the ropes sink into the ground, pressed against the tarp there is no sound, but the spirit makes bodies writhe. The old mothers offer their dwindling soprano, a precious utterance that summons the Savior, the only sound that summons these days, last days. The old mothers know the end of days. They sweat a passion in their white dresses and kerchiefs, pray for strength and necessary talk. Who says from the pulpit, I love the name, but stretches out a hand to signal hats, chargers, and velvet bags with wooden handles? What once sheltered a boy's curiosity comes down in wails of fever pitch, comes down in the grin of an ungodly charlatan, and few notice. Many people or less room. Go on, baby, and receive the right hand of fellowship. Down by the river, under which I was put by my own accord, I asked in prayer, in my silent time, in fear I asked. The book read, as Annette just mentioned, after the water there is only life. So when I was bad, when it was a secret, when I knew it was no mistake, when I saw the blood moon and crawled under the bed, away from the avenging angels, away from the blast of the horn, before the earth shook and closed my eyes, I asked for the water, asked to be taken, to be put under, so far under death, under sin, under the world of nights, asked for the water and not the shadow dance of the men behind the shades. After the water there was light. After the light there was clarity in waves. After clarity, death remained, and decision. So I rarely write about myself overtly, but that's a little touch, and I guess we can decide whether the baptism worked or not. I'm going to read from a long sequence called 21 Tremblings of the Bottom. Something about being in Provincetown. There's a lot of poems I'm going to read now that focus on cruising, which seems to be an art in this place. 21 Tremblings of the Bottom. 1. A coaxing, unsheathed the sword up to the hilt and in a sand that pulls but is not quick. Of gratitude, mostly, of how he needs me in order to be gracious to himself. The act, a sinless virtue, a kind of grace, though often graceless in its execution. Certainly not love, which is different from a total allegiance to lust, its satisfaction. In my case, an aim to please, after, of course, training it so that the pleasure pleases him. That pleases me. Green, the most green, alive, living with intention green. The well of him, perhaps too literal, but there you have it. Its own waters and whatever I bring, then flowers, roses, like a fucking magic realist novel, I want to say. Any grand court, any grand court from the past, but not so ancient as to predate civility, where there were subjects who believed betters were possible. Patriarchy is nothing if not seductive, though physical position does not always indicate one's position in hierarchy. But you, touching your toes or otherwise, know this. No one needed to tell me. The need told me. My form agreed and followed its function. You're welcome. Not my own pain, but I take requests. Have been forgiven for drawing blood, for capsizing the one we made of us in water, for the handprint on white flesh, down to the monogram dark folds make in my right palm, for making a contortionist of the nonconformist. Perhaps I did not begin in truth. A bed was broken once, thorn scratches and bark burn. I threw my shoulder out against a delicate thing. Time by time it be so good, I'm teary-eyed. I binge when feeling unloved. Is that pain? Ember that he was, I stoked him to full fire, my skin there taut and shining in human dew, its rich brown all the richer, having claimed the blushing, uncorrupted star. And blushing here is important, as it denotes an involuntary resistance. But we were talking of my own color, the depths of its sounding, without great effort, what most consider at best an odd fetish, and by fetish all meanings apply, coming up behind of a night in that slow, amphibious way, between my tongue and his speech is downfall. They both reached for it, and, having only the one, began instruction in turns. You want an implication of violence where there was none. We can agree to the semblance of violence that, in actuality, it was, each attempting to outdo the other in nasty, as daddy's holster is only empty when he has to use its contents. Straight shooter is taking it too far, the angel on the left shoulder imploring a straight face, maybe. No necessities to hand, they were inventive and merciless with hunger. Can you imagine the stamina it took? Whether or not they were satisfied is moot, but riddled, you can bet your bottom dollar. From wretch to warrior, it gives a man strength, I agree, often at the cost of his mind. It is still rare air, even among us libertines. The good stuff is, anyway, and during intervals I tend to keep the marks of longing on my body, a beacon. Old Head once wrote about being wrapped up in a woman's wild colors, and I wondered if there would be any difference if said woman was a man held captive in a woman's body. This body must know what its brain cannot articulate, as it was high on lust in a basement somewhere at the time of offer and undoing. Ever seen a peach too ripe and splitting of its own accord? The impulse for pleasure, a sort of moral imperative. Here is where it gets tricky. What consent below the age of consent? No, nothing so fragile as a young man, and we both were in the back seat of that car, doors locked to protect an innocence. We fumbled, and he said stop, looked uncomfortable, and we stopped. Is it a pity to crave a boy whose eyes are feeble, frame is slight? my heart and eyes procured with flesh, how to unlearn what the act or lack thereof had taught my primal self, a naked will facing its succor, first in a dazzling array of perversions. Here's where it gets tricky. I consented, and years later told a friend who shrank my pride into a dirty trauma before we believed the victim, even if the victim was myself, full of agency and interested in the business of grown folk. But what is consent below the age of consent? The men, blinded by the youth of my exotic specimen, were kind, gentle. All parties, I suppose, were lucky and grateful for the experience. Such intrigue wandering the corridors in search of ice, in breach of curfew and defiance of chaperones. For what else is adolescence? Now the men are old, and I older than they were when a certain liquidity of the eye, the heat of that latitude swelled an eye in me. The beautiful one aged beautifully. And now I'm going to read two short arias from the libretto that I wrote that Sam mentioned in her intro, called Sky in a Small Cage. And I suppose I should just give you a setting that it's an opera about the Sufi poet Rumi, and it focuses on a short period of 4 years in his life when he met another man named Shams al-Tabriz. And so in both these arias, Rumi is singing. The first one is called I and You. Bereft of you, the nougat has gone rancid. Everything I taste is bitter, and I rage in dark and light at any crumb of love that is not yours. Bereft of you, everywhere is desert, each grain of sand a scorched soul. I no longer know my own teachings. I burned, I burned, I burned. This is all I know for certain. And then, after Shams has left him or is murdered, the history is unclear, he sees apparitions of him, and so this aria is called Apparitions of Shams. And Shams is speaking, though it's Rumi's mind that is allowing him to do so. Apparitions of Shams. Without me, though the fires burn and the blankets are piled high, your bed is cold. Lover or beloved, I was the heat. Without me, though breath enters the nay and the mouthpiece is wet, there is no melody. Lover or beloved, I was music. And lastly, I'm going to read from a new work that is a song cycle I'm writing the text for. There'll be 12 songs in total. And the Canadian composer Matthew Ricketts is setting to music, and it will be sung by a single voice, a baritone. So the three of us are working together on this project, and we'll preview it maybe in the fall. So the cycle is called New Oak, and it is roughly guided by Walt Whitman's poem Live Oak with Moss, and so you may hear a bit of Whitman in here. It's largely guided by my obsession of trees, in this case the oak tree, so each title of the song is the name of a different species of oak, and again largely by the act of cruising. So I'll read the first three of those from New Oak. 1, Velutina. Sun leaves perhaps justify the heat here. Upland waters too cascade from these heights, if heights they can be called, in waves onto alluvial plains. The air settles through the trees, and shade leaves summer the bud's velvety pubescence. He comes along the path through forest, seeds a scent of flames mistaken for love, but is followed by a tide of lust. Something less than sinister rousing in the wood perfumes this secreted world. Clouds cloud the copse. Light moves, then disappears. His soul, not shade intolerant, offers itself to a friendship with a stranger in the sylvan holt. 2. Sinuata. Portal of oak smoothed by men's hands and more lures the randy denizens across its threshold. Moss crawls up the pillars of the wood and casts a green enchantment to those enthralled beneath branches touching. As they touch, entwining in growth, sharp but just and rounding when must. O companion, find me here among these thieves of my store. I came not knowing I wait for you. Find me here behind the leaves of modesty for reward of what in nature is holy, holy beyond the anonymous pleasure. Look, the grunt and moan, the crackled desiccation underfoot gives away our hiding. Friend, if friend you can be called, lover, if we outlast the light scratching through the canopy. Twig, a memory or talisman or both. Take me into your privacy, whether room or none, and do what you will. An acorn in my pocket is the token to watch the mighty swell into love that time by time began interest. What space there was is crowded now by trees, and the life we made in moments of caress. And before I read the last section, I do want to thank David again for the invitation of being here and for all of the wonderful poets participating with me this week in our journey through poetic time. This last section is called Lirata. Day, and your elongated flower droops, its twinkish name forgotten by such plaudits among the trees in the capital, in this high summer shade, pretense of night, as each man plans his conquest or conquering. Dawn delights best bestowed upon a bed, your breath panting its autumn memory of haze and moon, so different from light. To be the rest of a man, beach to his undulating wave, his waters know not their power. The sun lazes in its duty, friend, if friend you could be called, lover, if you outlast the day, and what little food remains of feast, a joy to be had on the shores of lust. Begged to rustle in the sands of your favor, to cover you in want, and your stillness replies in moonbeams on my face, in the flexure of my arm and on my breast. Thank you.
Dante, thank you so much for that beautiful reading, and to Sam for that lovely introduction. Next, I would like to invite to the stage Anne Giuliani, who is going to be introducing James Stroud.
And I just want to make sure I am. Can you hear me? Okay, well, I'm not going to be describing all of James Stroud's wonderful accomplishments as a master printmaker and a wonderful, fabulous artist, because you can get this in a website, right? So the most important thing, I think, is James the man, the real deal, the wonderful teacher that I've known since 1997. And so this is like a saga which describes James as someone that anyone would love to have as a teacher. I met James when I was going for my master's in fine arts and printmaking in New Bedford. It was at UMass Dartmouth in New Bedford, and I had Mark St. Pierre as my advisor, wonderful man who has passed away much too early in his life. And James was filling in for Kurt Wisniewski, and he was on his sabbatical. Kurt was. and James was the teacher. Now, I was the oldest person in this program. Not only the oldest person, but I was also the oldest of the teachers were all older than me. So I happened to confide in James because he's the kind of person that you can really have an affinity for, and you can approach him. And I said to him, I don't think I'm going to get through this master's degree because I don't have a printing press, but I do have my eye on a beautiful American French tool press that weighs 2,000 pounds. Now, this is a story about a giant press, really, and James's experience with this press, which is kind of funny. So I said to him, I don't think I'm going to be able to get this program, because I don't know really how I'm going to get this printing press down to my house on Cape Cod. So he says, I think I can help you with that. And I said, I was just so fabulously happy about it. And so he says to me, but if you throw in a meal of lasagna, then that really is going to hit, that's really going to clinch it. So I shook his hand. I said, oh, wonderful, I can do that. And shortly after that, he gets a truck, and he gets two very strong, husky guys, and they go up to Livingston, which was a distance away. They had a lot of equipment that allowed them to take their printing press parts. And he takes this big, huge 2,000-pound printing press apart. Now, mind you, some of the pieces were like 500 pounds because a steel bed of a printing press is really a large press. So he gets that, puts it in the truck, takes it down to Cape Cod, gets a wooden plank, puts it across the stairs of the front part of my house, hauls it up, puts it through the living room and into my makeshift studio, which was a second bedroom. He puts the thing together, and while they are preparing it, I am making 2.5 pounds of lasagna and, and sausages and meatballs and salad, and I also had an apple pie that I threw in at the also, and they ate the whole thing. So they were happy, I was happy, and I was able to get through my master's degree because I had a beautiful, really gorgeous printing press. Flash forward about to 2017, and I was in a plight again, another thing that was a problem. My husband had passed away after 48 years of marriage, and I had taken my bedroom, and I wanted to have this bedroom back so that I could have my family visit. So I took the basement, I took it to have it re-renovated for a studio. And so I approached James again, and I asked him, I said, do you think that you could take this press apart? Well, let's measure the doorways. Let's measure and figure out, now, how far does it have to go? And after figuring it all out, then he said, I think I can do it. Unfortunately, though, he brought only one person. And I looked at that and I said, that doesn't sound like that's going to come along. That's not going to go very well. If you can picture two men in their undershirts sweating, trying to maneuver the parts of a printing press through my bedroom, through my living room, into my porch, down the stairway, and maneuvering this parts of these printing presses through the basement door. And his words that he said shortly afterward was, well, don't ever ask me again. So with that, I didn't ask him until quite a long time for any favors, but he is the kind of person that is really a wonderful person that you can really approach. So in 2024, just last year, I had to get I decided I was getting older. In fact, I'm probably the oldest person in this room. And I wanted to sell my house, which I was fortunate enough to do. And I was fortunate enough to also have a buyer for my printing press, my large printing press. So it meant that I had to get the parts of the press apart. So I had to call. So I contacted James, but I didn't contact him immediately. I tried everything. I went to everybody around. I asked them all. And it was really very, so with a lot of trepidation, I asked James if he could really help me with that. So he came down. By that time, I was in Ithaca, so he didn't have another lasagna dinner, unfortunately. But I can't tell you how much I appreciate James. And I'm taking his workshop right now. We're having a wonderful time because James is very easygoing. If you make a mistake, he says, that's okay. It'll come out just fine. Don't worry about it. So this is the kind of man that I would love to have as a teacher. And I hope that all of you, sometime in your life, have this opportunity to have him for a teacher because it will be a treat galore. So with a lot of wonderful, I'm just very honored to introduce to you James Stroud. You're going to have to help me.
Such a sucker, huh? Anne has the distinction of having convinced me to move the same press 3 times in one lifetime. It was out of my mind. The third one was a treat, and you're gonna actually, we didn't coordinate this. When I heard that she was introducing me, I went into the archive files and found some very funny pictures. Come on. So this is the move, the last press, the 3rd time. Now, I did all the hauling the first 2 times, but the 3rd time I said, Anne, I am not bringing that. Matter of fact, after the 2nd time I said, this is the last time I'm moving this press. I will not be taking it out of your basement. Here I am taking it out of her basement. But I did convince the buyer of it to hire some riggers to actually haul it up the steps through the bulkhead, which was not easy. So here it is. So each one of those parts is like 500 pounds. And that's an engine hoist that I own. And I own it so everyone calls me up when they need to move a press. That's the press bed. That is about 600 pounds. And this is the famous lasagna. I found the picture of the lasagna. And it was so good. And we did eat it all. And it did. And not only did it come with the apple pie, it came with a nice bottle of Chianti, I have to say. It was quite good. So that's amazing. That's funny. All right, so here it is, Jim Stroud, master printer. What the hell is a master printer? So, quick notes here. So I'm an artist who studied painting and printmaking all my life, and in graduate school at Yale. Upon graduating from Yale, I needed to establish, a career in my own practice. But I could have taught, I could have done many things. But I bought a printmaking workshop up in Gloucester, Massachusetts, that came up miraculously for sale, and I started Center Street Studio. And a master print is best described as a recent article by Jack Curtis in Art New England called me a catalyst and a mentor, which I really liked. And also, I've been also described as a midwife that brought new works into life that might not have actually occurred had not been involved. Some people also called me a collaborator, which I find I think is very generous, but I think it sort of suggests too much authorship. I'm sort of just I describe it more like it's like shake and bake and I help, you know. And not many people, the younger people probably don't get that reference, but it's artists come to me. I help them realize their images and ideas in a medium that is unfamiliar to them. And in many cases, I fund those projects as publisher, and then I distribute them. And I've been doing it now for 40 years, which is mind-boggling even to me. So Center Street Studio was established in 1984. We celebrated our 40th anniversary last year, which is pretty incredible. And I established it in Gloucester, where it was. I finished paying it off in 2 years and moved it to Boston. It was in Boston in 2 locations, and then the writing was on the wall, and the tyranny of landlords had to end. And so my wife and I built our own studio on our property in Milton, Massachusetts in 2001. It was beautiful post and beam barn that went up in 5 days. Janine designed the footprint for it, and then all the timbers are crafted up in Maine, and then delivered and assembled in 5 days. So the building was tight to the weather in a week. We finished it off over the course of the summer. There it is. There was one in summer. There's winter, and that's in relation to our 19th century farmhouse with an acre of land. So we moved the whole operation out here, and we've been there ever since. Little interior shots. So that's where we do it all. So typically in these talks, I just sort of give an overview of all the projects I've done over the years to show there's a whole range of works everywhere from photographic realism to abstract expressionism to conceptual work. But I decided that for this talk, I wanted to focus on the work of John Wilson, who's an African-American artist who I always wanted to work with. I've known about his work for a long time. He was friends with one of my mentors at Yale, who always suggested I should look him up and try to work with him. And John passed away in 2015. John was the artist that won the commission to do the bronze portrait of Martin Luther King that stands in the Capitol building in Washington. And I found a wonderful quote from when he delivered it that I want to read. He delivered it to Washington in the back of a Mazda, wrapped in a sleeping bag. And he said, bringing it down there, he said, somehow it seemed like the epitome of the seat of power, and it alienated me. And he told the Globe in 1986. And I said, I never felt part of it, but when I delivered that sculpture, that changed. I felt a piece of me is in that building. And I believe it's the only bronze portrait of an African American in the rotunda. It's surrounded with other sculptures as well. In any case, so I always wanted to work with John, and then he got, just as the luck would have it, he was tapped by the Limited Editions Club in New York, which was a publisher that made livres d'artistes with artists. They asked artists to choose pieces of literature that were in the public domain and make prints that either were inspired by the text or illustrated the text. And they made these beautiful volumes that with letterpress text, the entire text, and then with original prints bound into the books, and then also a portfolio of individual prints signed and numbered by the artist. John chose the short story, or the novella by Richard Wright, Down by the Riverside. And it's a really tragic tale of a black family during Jim Crow South, during the flood, the Great Mississippi Flood of 1928. And he did a series of 6 etchings. So this is the book with the full text, with the frontispiece there. And it's a really tragic story. I hate to even go through it. But in any case, the prints are really beautiful and really powerful. They're all etching in aqua tint. They took us about a month to make the plates, and it took me about 6 months to print the editions. The editions were 300 for the book and then 75 for the portfolios. So this gave me the first opportunity to work with John. And tragically, it ends with the protagonist man dead down by the riverside. So during that project, John's work, this drawing, was a study for that bronze sculpture that you saw, and the MFA in Boston owns that drawing, and it was curated into a show called In the Spirit of Martin that was organized by the Smithsonian. It was going to travel around the country from 2002 to 2004, about 120 works of art that were either inspired by King's message or images of King himself. And they used John's drawing for the cover of the catalog and all the advertising. And it was the image of the exhibition. And the MFA has a really strict policy that it can only allow a work of art like that out for about 3 months. So it was going to be only in one of the several venues that the show was going to travel to. And it was a dilemma. And the MFA made no exceptions. So here they have this image, plastered all over the books, all over the advertising, all the banners, the posters. And so I suggested to John, why don't you come to the studio and make an etching, not a facsimile, but an etching inspired by that drawing. And then we would change it out once the drawing gets returned to the MFA. And he put that forth to the Smithsonian. They said that would be amazing if you can pull that off. So I invited him back to the studio after the Richard Wright project was done. And can you all see that? Because the light is a little strong. Anyway, there's a huge copper plate, 36 by 30. He struggled with it for a while. It took about a month to get that plate done. And there were many factors that why it took so long to do it. One was that John was struggling to get both the quality of the drawing and the likeness together to come together as one. And but also I gave him a plate that was 36 by 30 inches, large copper plate, big area to draw, because I assumed that the drawing was life size. And John's saying here, it's so goddamn big. And I said, John, it's as big as the drawing. He goes, no, the drawing's this big. This is too big. It was a big area to conquer, right? And so it took us a month to get through the plate development. And when you do a plate like this, as you work on it, you take a print, right? You pull a proof. It's called a state proof to see the progress of the image. So it's a bit of a treat. You can actually see all 18 states. I photographed every single state that we went through in order to get to the final print. So this is a soft ground etching. So he had a sketch of the image that, and then he lays that piece of paper down on top of the plate that has sort of a waxy surface to it. And by redrawing the drawing with a pencil, the pressure of the pencil pulls the wax off the copper plate, and you can etch what looks like a pencil line into the plate. It's very sensitive to pressure, and I suggested, John, you have to keep your hands and fingers off this thing because they will pull up the material. And John is a sculptor at heart, and here he is manhandling the plate as he goes along, and you can see all of that chatter that's behind it is all his fingerprints and palm prints on it. And I told him, I said, don't worry, John, later on we can take that out. And he says, oh, great, but I had no intention of taking it out because I just knew it was going to be really beautiful, and it's pointing to process, which is really important to me. So then we applied what's called a hard ground, and he did a hard ground line etching, building up the tones through layers of line. And each one of these, he'd do a little bit of work and say, can we print, I'd etch it, and he says, can we print it? And I'd have to do it so we can see it. So there are a lot of baby steps here, but, and there are many more prints between them that don't show much progress. So we sort of culled them out. So we get to here, and John it's a really beautiful drawing, but it doesn't look like Martin Luther King. And John says, I don't know who this is, but I hate to meet him in a dark alley. And it's just like, oh my God. And so he says, what are we going to do? How do we correct this? And I showed him you have to actually literally scrape, carve down the surface of the copper plate. And now here he is now scraping. He scraped a little bit, and he says, I need to see an image. I print it. A little bit more. You see, each time he's scraping further and further out, getting down, scraping, sort of smoothing the plate out by hand. Now I got here and I pulled this, and he was, you can imagine, was pretty disappointed, right? I mean, it looks pretty grim. And I told him, John, just think if you were Francis Bacon, you'd be home by now. And he liked that. And so then I applied what's called a spit bite aquatint over the entire surface, darkened it again so that he could start to pull out the features gradually through scraping and burnishing, a little less aggressively than we did before. So now this is interesting. This is not the finished print. So this state and this state are the same. I printed two of them so that we can have one to record and one he can take home and literally scrape and erase the ink off the paper so that he can draw on the actual proof to come back, to bring it to a place where that can be a goal that we can achieve back on the plate. And so this is the same state as this, a separate proof, scraped, erased, and drawn back on with charcoal by John. Come on now, there we go. So that's our goal, okay? So then, of course, he scrapes it all the way down again. We add a little bit more spit biting, a little bit more tone, a little bit more, and then he asked me to darken it up again because he felt he had gone too far. So I add a spit bite over the entire surface again, and then we start taking baby steps. I sort of pull the reins in a little bit. That's state 17. And then I decided just that on a whim, I laid a thin sheet of Japanese paper inside the rectangle there. It's called a chine collé to sort of give it warmth there. And that's the final state. It's really the most important print that's come out of my shop in 40 years. It's such a powerful print and powerful image. And that's the actual copper plate with its steel facing on. And look at the difference. Look at that image, and then look at that plate. Isn't that amazing? So I'm happy to report, too, that after we got this all done, and the Museum of Fine Arts finally agreed to buy the final state, I convinced them to buy all 18 states and the copper plate for their collection. And 4 of those states are, and the maquette for the bronze sculpture of King were recently in. John has finally gotten the recognition that he deserves. He's always been highly regarded as an artist in Boston and elsewhere, but the MFA in Boston and the Metropolitan Museum of Art together co-curated a full retrospective of John's work. It just closed at the MFA in Boston on June 22nd. So if you didn't get a chance to see it, it opens at the Met on September 12th. This is a smaller print. It was a warm-up print for the Martin Luther King print. He did this a week before we started the King print. He wasn't concerned about the likeness. He just wanted to get his feet wet again in the etching process. This is now 2002, so we made the plates in 1999 for the Richard Wright project. So he wanted to sort of get going again, and we made this edition of a smaller print. It's like 20 by 16. There's a sculpture that John did, a massive bronze sculpture called Eternal Presence, at the National Museum of African American Artists in Roxbury, where John was born. And there was a beautiful charcoal drawing of that, a study for that sculpture that I always admired. And so after the King project, I invited him back and said, I've always admired this drawing. Can we make a print based on that? Again, not a facsimile, but something that it's a springboard towards a new print. And this came out of that. Again, another large plate, 36 by 30, etching in aquatint. And that's the maquette for the Eternal Presence sculpture. And you can see this is a view of the exhibition at the MFA with the print behind it. And then later on, a few years later, John wasn't making prints I think the last etching he made was 1973. So the first etchings he made again were with me back in 1999. And so I was his printer. I was his master printer for the last 17 years of his life. This is called Head of Woman, small print, about 12 by 10, I believe. And this is called Side View, which is a smaller version of the large monumental head print. I visited the exhibition at the MFA about 9 times with curators and friends and family and school groups that I get calls from teachers and ask if I would meet them there, and I was happy to do it. And here's the section of the exhibition with the maquette of the king print, 4 of the states of the king, and then they had an interview with me about working with John on the wall, which got my 15 minutes of fame there. This is one of the most exquisite drawings, I think, that the museum owns, and it's the model for Eternal Presence. Her name was Roz. She was friends of John's oldest daughter, Becky, and it's just the most exquisite drawing. And this, John started in about 2012. We started a self-portrait. And sadly, a year later, we didn't work on it as much as we should have, and he developed dementia. He lived to 92 years old. He developed dementia, and he couldn't work on this anymore. And so it sort of arrested in this sort of state of becoming. And I was surprised. I didn't have a proof of it in my archive, and the estate put it in a show in a gallery on Newbury Street recently. And it's the only state of it. And I was surprised how far we had gotten. I don't remember haven't gotten that far on it. But it's a really beautiful print, and I'm going to suggest to the estate that we might do a posthumous edition, because this is just the only state of it. And there's John and I about probably 2 years before he passed. So just want to end with, they were very generous. The museums are very generous and asked me to write an essay for the catalog for the exhibition, which I'm going to donate to Fogg here and to put in the library. So if you all want to take a peek at it, I'll be leaving it there. But so following the print of King, we completed 3 more prints together, leaving a 4th, a self-portrait, unfinished before John passed in 2015. I often describe the etching of King as one of the most important prints to come out of my studio over the past 40 years. John was a fighter, and when you look at a work such as the King portrait, his prints seem to have come effortlessly into existence. However, my unique position as a master printer gave me the honor and privilege of serving this great man and artist and bearing witness to his struggle. So anyway, if you have an opportunity to see the show in New York City, I really highly recommend you go see it. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us, and Anne for that lovely sharing of your stories. Next, we want to open it up to the question and answer session. So what we'll do is we'll have Jim and Annette and Dante please return to the stage and have a seat. And if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, but I would ask that wait until Miracle bring the microphone to you, because we have people that could be live streaming and want them to be able to hear the question. So so there we go. You have microphones there. They should be turned on. And who would like to kick it off with the first question? Here we go.
Hi, thank you so much for the, can you hear me? Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I was really struck by that quotation, Jim, in your presentation where John Wilson was saying, you know, initially I saw DC as the seat of power, but now I feel that there is a part of me in that building. And it reminded me of, Annette, when you kicked us off and talked about, you know, sort of the talked about the seat of power being, for example, the archive of origin stories and things like that. And so I guess just a question for everyone is like, do you want a piece of your work to be in the seat of power? And if so, what piece would that be?
I'm going to try. Can you hear me okay? Okay, do I want a piece of my work in the seat of power? That's the question. I think my answer to that would be ultimately no, because what I want is the work that I try to do to be so ubiquitous that it's not special. So that I want Indigenous voices in general to be so common in literature that the seat of power doesn't think it needs a special place, right? It's not unique enough. It's not, and another way of looking at that for me is that it's not token. So I think that's not necessarily what you meant by that question, but that's one way of looking at it that I would answer it.
I mean,
You want me to speak as well? I'm sure John was very pleased to have it there, at least at that time, because he didn't feel like, I don't think he felt that he had a voice in that space, but at the time it seemed like the government seemed legitimate, but it doesn't seem anymore. So yeah, I would wonder what he would think now. He maybe want it back, I mean, I would.
I was just going to say, I would argue that that is the seat of power. I think so many of us cede the power to that place or to that body, and I don't necessarily think that's where it is. It's actually in our hands. We give it away. So, yeah, that's all I have to add.
Was there another hand over here somewhere? I have a question. I was wondering if you all could answer a question about translation, Dante, in terms of translating from between languages and also from the language of music, from lyric to music. Annette, I was wondering how you translate history into narrative. And James, I was wondering if you could talk about a little bit more about your process translating between mediums with different artists.
Do you want me to go first? Yeah, I think translation is very important, and in my own practice, I think a lot about the theory behind translation. So I think it's probably a little bit easier to make a decision about whether you're going to have a faithful translation, so trying to get as close to what the original author created, or if you want an idiomatic translation, which is going to be much closer to the audience receiving the piece of literature. I always vote on the side of sort of the faithful translation because I think that is what makes the piece of literature unique. It's that it's filtered through this one voice. However, I like a lot of idiomatic translations. I think there's a lot of power dynamic in making that decision, particularly with Sky in the Small Cage. The composer was really enamored of Coleman Barks's translation of Rumi, and they are beautiful poems. They are really beautiful poems. I love those poems. They are not translations of Rumi. They are adaptations of Coleman Barks's idea of what Rumi's poems sounded like. And in connection to what Annette has been talking about or spoke about in her talk, there are speakers of the language in which Rumi wrote his poems who, are highly offended by the Coleman Barks translations and have set out to correct that. So that's from the literary side. From music, I think it's they go hand in hand. I, even though I'm a poet, I believe that music is the higher art form. In our workshop this week, we have been listening to or talking about pieces of music and how that they help us see poetic time. And so music has a lot more to do with if I can be sort of more general about it, has a lot more to do with tone and color and emotion, which are highly subjective. And so you just have to find your way in it and hope for the best.
I think when I think about translating history to narrative in my work, it's really important to me that I'm conveying a living culture. Quite often, the general public thinks about native cultures in the past tense. And so even if I'm writing historical fiction, which Even As We Breathe was, I want to ensure that the stories I'm telling present an audience maybe with a history that they're not familiar with, but also translate the effects or repercussions of that history into the present tense, so that the decisions that we are making in my fictional world community today are always ramifications of our complete history. And so I want to make sure that I'm not just giving a history lesson to readers, but I'm carrying forth the impact of that history into the narrative that may be more present tense.
People always ask me how I go about choosing the artists that I want to work with and publish. And generally it happens by standing in front of their work at an exhibition. I might discover them at a gallery or like the Drawing Center in New York, for instance. And when the gears in my head start turning, and I start building a print in my head, I'm an artist first and a master printer second, right? And so, but here the gears churn, and I say, if I do this, this, and this, I can help make a meaningful translation of the issues and ideas and images from their primary work into a print, whether it be an etching, a woodcut project, or a monotype, series of monotypes. And so that translation takes place in advance for me, and then as an artist, I sort of lay out a strategy with materials and techniques and say, this is how I think we might come to a meaningful solution for you. And most of the artists don't have the experience and the technical experience and knowledge, so they trust me, which may or may not be a good thing. But generally it comes out well, and then we can make adjustments as we go along, but that translation has sort of happened in my head as an artist. If this was my work, this is what I would do, given my knowledge of the medium and how I could achieve something good. And it seems to have worked for 40 years. So, and I'll just keep going with it.
Thanks to all three of you for really great presentations. I just want to ask Dante about something you just read. What are your thoughts about writing about sex?
They're all good. I think that sex is such an important part of our species' existence. And also I think the more we write about sex, the sooner we get over and not just writing. The more we write about sex, the more we paint about sex, the more we print about sex, the more we do everything about sex, the sooner we get over all of the hang-ups that seem to be at the root of many of the issues that we are grappling with today on the political front. I think people are still locked in this idea that privacy comes from the body, which is this very sort of Judeo-Christian idea about that. And it's just not true. If the argument is about nature, we are the only species that are clothed. And so we should quickly get over this sort of weird symptom of our species, clothing ourselves. It is an odd thing to do. Animals, other animals, because we are also animals, change their location when the climate is inhospitable to them, and then they go back to wherever their homes are, and they don't need clothes because they do that. And that's flippant, but yeah, I think at the center of it is I think writing about sex is a healthy part of a sexual life, or the sexual aspects of our life.
One more question? You ready?
James, do you ever feel like you said that you think as an artist first. Do you ever feel as though your thoughts as an artist are imposing themselves upon the artists that you work with, or do you feel like you're able to pull back and see both their
That
vision?
is such a great question. Yes, it's sort of my duty. But I don't think I can help. Yeah, I never tell them what to do. I lay out that strategy. I guide them in a direction. If I think something is working in the image and the technique combined, then I'll offer my I wouldn't say criticism, my observations. But I think you can't help but expect that. I'm a human being. I'm an artist. I have my ideas. But it is a delicate dance, right? It's how far can I insert myself into that process, the aesthetic part of it, beyond the technical. And I think because I'm an artist, I'm helpful in that regard. Like, I'm an extra set of eyes to sort of read it. And the art, I ask them, what is it that you're trying to happen in this image? How do you want this space to be read? And they tell me, and I'll let them know if I think it's actually reading that way or not. And that might be really helpful for them. But it is a really delicate relationship, and I forgot to mention earlier that the responsibility. If I thought about how intense this relationship is and can be, and if I spent time dwelling on it, I would probably run, not walk, from this profession, because it's kind of scary. It's a lot of responsibility. You think about that Martin Luther King print and how John struggled with it. And he had his own way of working. He was a really aggressive, very physical guy, and he kept going too far. Both ways, both positive and negative. And I had to figure out, how do I pull the reins in without creating a problem here? But it was all intuitive. It was like I guess it comes also with a great deal of trust. I have a relationship, very trustful relationship with the artists when they come work for me. And I often mention that I don't invite printmakers necessarily to come work with me because they know too much. So what I do is invite printers and painters and sculptors that don't make prints, and so they don't know when I screw up. But Anne, you said something today that there are no mistakes in printmaking, right? There's only opportunities there, really. She says there's no mistakes, and I say that's right. There are only opportunities. And then sometimes, like we had a technical failure yesterday with one of my students. Where's David? David. We had a technical failure, right? And it's embarrassing, a little bit embarrassing. It was a little thing, we didn't know about the equipment, but we said, okay, let's go with it, and if you don't like it, we'll start anew. Let's start afresh. And it developed into something far better than the original idea. It's like the medium spoke, and the image embraced it. And I thought that was great. And it became something that you never expected, right?
True.
And that's, for better or worse, I don't know. But it's, in any case, yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Oh, you were worried.
That's good.
Sure you were. Really? Well, I didn't get that sense, but yeah, it's things happen.
Yeah.
And
Shit happens,
sometimes you have
as
no
they say.
control over it, and just let it be.
Hi. So in my own writing practice, I'm very reliant on writing prompts. And I'm curious, in terms of all three of you in your own artistic practice, if you have something to catapult you into play or into a form or whatever it is. And you could say no, or you could say none of your business, as a friend of mine has done. But I'm very curious about that.
I will say this novel all started with a prompt I gave myself, which was to write as long as I possibly could on the simplest object I could think of. So at that point, it was a clean bone. I don't know why that came to mind, but that started the whole novel for me. But I won't say that it's always how I get into a piece. I was telling our workshop today that I actually start scenes with dialogue, with conversations between characters. And it's not that those will end up actually being in the finished work, but I find myself oftentimes in that initial drafting, so in a journal, it will be conversations between characters. And that may never see the light of day, but for some reason, that's what gets me started.
I do have prompts. In my own painting, which I best described as sort of geometric abstraction with an architectural sort of twist to it, right? And what I do is I pick a particular format. I then play a game of chess where I start to understand and learn about that format through geometry, right? And I just keep making marks, keep making marks, keep making marks, so I fully understand sort of space contained within that particular set of dimensions, right? And then I start to identify, so that's my prompt, all right? And then from that, I start identifying planes that then I sort of articulate through a series of grids and create planes of surface planes that are actually you can view through. So in the end, the entire, I usually end my talk with images of my own, and they would make sense if, this would make sense if you actually saw some of the paintings. But the whole thing is covered with planes that look architectonic, spatial, but yet are still translucent, that you see through it and see those individual and earlier geometric decisions. So you're peering into the infrastructure of the thing while you have this sort of macro structure sitting on the surface. So, but that was my strategy, my prompt.
My prompt is always speech, and so I'm always eavesdropping on conversations. People say the most marvelous things. I write them down. I also think of reading as speech when I'm reading, because the writer is saying something. They don't know they're saying it to me, but they're saying something. So I write down phrases all of the time, and usually those phrases turn into titles of poems, but sometimes they get into the body of the poem. But mostly, I keep them as titles, and the titles are always, then they become inspiration for me to write something. This is also a little bit cheating, since you were my professor, but I did have this class that Kamiko taught on how to which was really great for somebody like me who in my social life am very gregarious, but in my poetic practice, I'm very, very monk-like formal. And so this class was about poetic form and how to play. And I remember the first, line was this class is a sandbox, and all of the poetic devices are like the big plastic toys in the sandbox. That was my first day of graduate school. So there you go.
How about a big round of applause for James Stroud, Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle, and Dante Micheaux. Thank you very much. Please remember